Thank you for attending today's webinar, Planning Your Data-Driven Success Using a Capability Lens. Today's webinar is one in a series of webinars that Procept Associates offers monthly for free to the world so that you can get a better understanding of our capabilities and learn some interesting information while earning some free PDUs. Today's presenter is Mark Pico. Mark is an experienced consultant, educator, manager, and analyst. With graduate and undergraduate degrees in engineering from the University of Waterloo, he's led numerous consulting engagements, helping clients adapt to fundamental shifts in their business models. As a leading practitioner of business intelligence and analytics, Mark teaches companies on a global basis how to become data-driven as they implement intelligent business solutions. He is a CBIP certified at the mastery level and maintains his professional focus at the intersection of business, operations, and technologies. Mark has several years of energy industry experience based on a variety of roles in the pipeline, distribution, and production sectors. We're honored to have Mark join us today. We're thrilled to be going into this topic. It's a fascinating topic as the world becomes more complex. Data becomes much more important to how we make good decisions. Mark, I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kevin, and good afternoon to everybody. And as we're approaching our long weekend, I'm going to wish Canada a happy birthday. Our big anniversary is coming up, the big 150 celebration, so I hope you guys enjoy the upcoming weekend. Before we do that, though, we have a little bit of interesting topics to go over, and I'm going to spend, I want to set up perspective on what I'd like to accomplish over the next, 45 minutes or so. And some takeaways I hope you take from this is to understand what I mean by a capability. And now this term we use, but I find that capability is a really interesting building block for helping us figure out where we want to go. But there's components to a capability we'll talk about. But there's certain kinds of capabilities we have to develop and define if we want to become data-driven and successfully at it. So we want to be able to use the model we want to assemble to take more of a strategic view of analytics and data processing, if you like, today. And it should help us focus and develop a way to establish a vision and a roadmap and to define the success we're trying to achieve by becoming data-driven. So these are the things we'll hopefully accomplish in the next 45 minutes or so. But right off the bat, I don't know if you guys are aware, you probably are, the world is getting very, very complex, very complicated. In the world of data since probably 2010 or 11 or 12, there's been an explosion, a literal explosion of data, technology, products, tools, approaches, and in my view, it's causing a tremendous amount of noise and confusion in the marketplace. So when I started thinking about how to simplify this, I started thinking, can we build a capability lens to let us peer down on this landscape, to pick the things we think are really important, so we can assemble the right pieces and ignore the noise and distractions. So that's kind of the theme I want to take us through over the next little while. So we need some terms, some definitions, because another view I have is that there's many terms that are competing for our attention, and they tend to overlap and conflict, and they generally cause confusion because we don't all share the common view. So there's many terms out there around business analytics, business excellence, business strategy, data-driven processes, business intelligence. All these terms are out there, and they have sometimes different meanings for us. So we need to get on the same page. I want to spend the next couple of slides to define some things to give us the basis where we're heading here, because the point here is we need to align our thinking within our groups and our teams and our managers. So right off the bat, I want to talk about business intelligence. Now, this term's been around for several decades. It's not new. But what is new is a shift in thinking about what we mean by the term business intelligence. And I'm going to say it's about organizations becoming better, faster, and smarter at the things they want to do. It's no longer about the things we build. We used to think business intelligence was about building reports or databases or processes or tools, and we thought about it as a bunch of things. Think about this instead of as a capability for organizations to think, analyze, plan, learn, etc. Why? To accomplish goals and to attain those goals. So think of business intelligence as a shift in thinking from things to capabilities, which is a segue into the theme of what I want to talk about here today. But another term out there which is competing with business intelligence is the term analytics. This term is thrown around a lot today. We see it in all sorts of contexts. I'd like to think of analytics as the creation of net new information or insights by different types of techniques, but analytics should help teach you something you didn't know before. So it's the creation and delivery of new information and insights, and usually it requires some sort of data, some sort of a model which translates inputs to outputs, some sort of a technique, and another really key ingredient is thinking skills, mental skills. Analytics does not happen for us. Analytics really takes place in our own minds based on the information we're presented. And so it's a mental process as well, which is a common theme we have to think about shortly here. Okay, big data, another term out there. Now, we're bombarded by this term. It's all over the place. There's the conventional definition of big data with the 3 or 5 V words shown here as volume, variety, velocity, and some new terms, veracity and value. These are terms we sort of characterize it, but I don't really like those definitions because big data really, in my view, is non-traditional data. It's data we have access to because of changes in the internet, because of technology like GPS devices, social media platforms. These are all creators of net new information which we didn't have before. So I think of big data as impactful data, which is non-traditional, that provides greater context to our businesses. So this is another kind of definition we have to deal with. What about being data-driven? What does this really mean? Well, data-driven, we kind of throw that around as an alternative to analytics or BI, but think of being data-driven as a deliberate approach to try to drive our processes and our decision-making based on evidence. It's based on empirical evidence that should guide us. It doesn't necessarily replace what we already know, but it should guide us, much like the instruments in our dashboard of our car will guide us, but it's really our brain and our vision that take us where we really want to go. We also, if we're becoming data-driven, will on purpose instrument our business processes to collect data maybe we didn't have before. We might want to measure the duration or delays in a business process or the satisfaction of the customer of that process. So there's ways to collect data on purpose to help us get feedback to say how are the processes behaving. And we also get into experimental design. Companies that are really committed to becoming data-driven will on purpose design experiments to find the impact of something on a customer sentiment. What's the impact of price on demand? What's the impact of some new feature on a product with customer satisfaction? And we need experimental design to actually build theories as to what the evidence is telling us. So that's kind of a data-driven kind of perspective. But where this is all going is, what does it mean to be successful? Because the title of the webinar is, we want data-driven success. So how do you assess that? How do you define what success is? How do you become successful? So data-driven processes include a lot of the concepts of business intelligence, analytics, big data, but if you're using all that to become successful, it means the organization itself has to have evidence of being better than it was before. Now, what is better? Better is a very loose word, obviously. We have to have criteria for what it means to be better, faster, or smarter as an organization in terms of how we serve our customers, how we bring products to market, how we deliver projects, all of those kinds of things. And why does it really matter? Why is it important to be better, faster, and smarter than our competition? So we need to think about what's the reason for wanting to become that way, and what's the success criteria is really in terms of the impact we make. It's the measurable difference in being data-driven now versus what we were before, and we need to see an uptick in performance somewhere, which are going to be measured by business outcomes. So we're going to use this as a basis for a framework I want to build, which is going to be this capability lens I'm talking about. So let me now define another basic concept here, which is capability. Now, capability at one level is a really simple concept. It's the capacity to do something. So if you have the capability to run, you can get out and you can go running. So it's the capacity to exercise an activity. And usually we describe capabilities with a verb. It's the ability to serve customers, to manage inventory, to reduce cost. So these are all capabilities starting with a verb. But the implication of the definition here is that once we know the right capabilities we want to build and develop, they become the categories of what drives our business performance. So these are things we're going to want to say, how good are we at the capability? How well are we executing to what we need to do? So we're going to separate the essential capabilities from the ones that are just sort of not that important. And that becomes part of the planning process. So we have to find what I'm going to call the key capabilities. These are the things that lead to a competitive advantage. These are things that we say we have to really, really be good at something in order to get a product to market, to get a customer to like us, to have us want to do business in a certain market area. These are the things we believe we have to be good at to become successful. So we have to work backwards from our success criteria into the things we have to develop. Now, capabilities don't just happen. They have to be developed. So we're going to find out when we start planning our data-driven success approach in a few minutes, we have to have essentially projects or activities to create the capabilities we think we need. And we have to develop them, just like any other thing we build. We have to have a view as to what's important, and we build them and we develop them. And then we sit back and say, are we improving or not? So here's a very simple example. I hope this will kind of strike it to home. If we think of an automobile as a metaphor for the original definition of business intelligence, business intelligence used to be defined as a bunch of things, a bunch of components, reports, dashboards, databases, etc. And if you argued from a car's point of view, where does motion come from? How does a car generate motion? Because if you look at a car sitting in a parking lot, it's just sitting there. It's a bunch of assets and components that are connected. The tires have air in them, there's fuel in the tank, hopefully, there's oil in the crankcase, and all the parts are assembled. But there's no motion. It's just sitting there. The ability to turn that mechanical system into a motion-generating system means we have to add a human to it. The human becomes the driver of the assets or of the components. And it's the interaction of the human skills and the components we built create what's sometimes called an emergent property. The emergent property is that property that does not exist in the car by itself or in the human by itself. It's when the human and the car together are working together, then they can drive 100 kilometers an hour. But the human by himself can't go 100 kilometers an hour, and the car without the human can't go 100 kilometers an hour. That happens when you bring them together. And so what happens when we talk about business intelligence or analytics or data-driven approaches, we have to know all the components to bring together because we want the measurable impact that happens when the proper pieces are assembled. So let me now shift focus to go from those definitions to say, I've alluded to this idea of a capability that needs to be assembled, almost like as a puzzle, to say what capabilities are going to drive the kinds of success you're looking for. And I'm going to say that a capability, a generic capability, is made up of 4 building blocks, or like the puzzle pieces we see here. And I'm going to say that the building blocks of any capability are based on technology and tools, process, which defines our activities, the human skills it takes to exercise those processes, and certain standards and norms it takes to govern and regulate and control how we approach doing things, to do things according to the beliefs and culture of our companies. So we have to find out, do we have all of these building blocks in place for a given capability? So that's the work we do. These are the tools and techniques we use to do the work. These are the people and the skills to do the work. And then these are the leadership, policies, governance, and culture issues that incent, motivate, and constrain how the work is done, so we do things correctly and safely, appropriately. So all of those things together form what I call a capability. And just like the 4 wheels on the car before, if one of these puzzle pieces is missing, it's like having a flat tire in your car. You're not going to go very far. And so we have to find out, as we're talking about data-driven capabilities, what pieces do we need in place, and where are the weak spots we have to invest in to develop. Just like filling up a tire in your car, if it's gone soft or flat, you have to replace it, repair it, or inflate it so you get the traction you want. And so many companies that I come across in my travels don't have a complete view. They maybe have 2 or 3 of these 4 things, and there's always sort of something missing, and they wonder why they struggle. So I want to further refine the idea of a capability and think of the fact that capabilities really are like little miniature systems that have inputs and outputs. So capabilities by themselves, once we define, we'll get more specific ones in a minute or 2, but think of a capability as delivering something, and we're going to call it an output or call it an impact. So if we have the right capability that delivers an impact, that's great. But capabilities also depend on other things as inputs. These are called dependencies. And so we're going to start to map capabilities to say, what capability drives another capability through some sort of a chain, some sort of a cause and effect chain. And that's going to be the basis of our capability lens we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So think of a capability then as having inputs or dependencies and delivering outputs or impacts to somebody else. And this becomes the building block, because we're going to get into the idea of a capability map shortly here. And here's an example of a capability map. And I'll get more specific in a few minutes. So we think about capabilities as, think of capability one as the ability to run, and the capability number two is the ability to throw a baseball. So those are two basic building blocks, and capability three might be a team capability where we have to say we're going to have capability to win a game. But we have to have the running capabilities and the ball throwing capabilities to enable our team to win. So we start to think how capabilities drive other capabilities. And some could be at the individual level, some could be at the organization or team level. They enable each other through cause and effect or dependencies. And so our challenge is to say, well, how do we get data-driven success? What are the capabilities we have to have in place to get better, faster, smarter, because data is now available to us? And so this mapping exercise is going to be the process to start doing that. Because as I go back to this original picture, if you want to become data-driven, for whatever reason, you have to have a reason for it. It may be because you want to become more competitive, more innovative, reduce cost. There's something you want to be able to do, but you have to know why you're doing it. And the capability lens helps us focus priorities and impact areas and drive down to the building blocks we want to select from this enormous choice of opportunities out there for us in terms of data and tools. How do we assemble them into success criteria? We need focus. So what I've just done so far to this point is really giving us a bunch of definitions and some concepts around building blocks. Because now we're going to shift our focus to say, well, how do we take this and apply it into something that I can construct in some sort of a planning process to identify what do I need to do to become successful with being data-driven. So I'm going to think in terms of, think of a business right now that's not data-driven, or any organization. So an organization, I don't care if it's profit, non-profit, education, government, or a private company, I don't care what kind. But companies and organizations want to produce outcomes for their stakeholders. So an organization that is not currently data-driven does things in a conventional ho-hum kind of way. And you judge their success usually by the outcomes they produce, usually by margins or by cost or by safety or by environmental impact, customer satisfaction, etc. These are all potential areas of impact. And these are common ways you might define the success of any organization. Now, if you want to become data-driven, though, you got to see what we're doing now isn't good enough. Because to become data-driven means I want an uptick in performance. I want to do something I couldn't do before. I want even higher margins, or lower costs, or even happier customers, or lower risks, or higher levels of security. You need to be able to say, I was not data-driven yesterday, tomorrow I'm going to be. What's the uptick in improvement in performance that this should drive for me? So I want to enable that traditional business capability we've had for decades as we've run businesses, and add pieces to them. And this becomes the data-driven components I want to add to give me an uptick in performance. And right off the bat, I'm going to say we need something called an analytics capability. And I'll define these in a little bit later. But think of analytics capability as the ability to generate new insights and information, somehow. Without saying how, you have to do that. But analytics capabilities are going to be dependent on having data capabilities. Now, I'm talking about data here not as a thing, not as a field in a database. I'm talking about it as a capability. And think of capabilities as starting with verbs. So we have to have the capability to find data, to store data, to provision data, to secure data. We have to put verbs in front of what we have to be able to do with data. Because data, if it's a true asset, needs verbs around it to enable other things. So I'll get more detail about this in a few minutes. So think of the data capabilities we have to build and develop, enables the analytics capabilities, which then will enable something new to that business we've always had. And the fourth piece, or the third new piece really, the fourth piece of the framework, I'm going to call organizational capabilities. And these are the things that need to change how we govern, plan, incent, motivate. It's the human condition. It's the political side of companies. How we enable people to use data, to use analytics, to change their behavior. So this becomes, the light blue building blocks here are trying to enable a traditional business to say now we're doing something different because we're becoming business or data driven. So this becomes the thesis as we go into building up our framework now. So this becomes the capability lens, these 4 layers, and I want to walk through and say, what might I see in these layers? What are the things, because this should help me understand what I need to build and create to achieve the capabilities I desire. So right off the bat, the very first piece is the impact. This is the so what factor. Why do you want to become data-driven? And so think of these words under impact categories as areas we could improve on. And think of these as just simply categories. We might want to become more innovative, to build new kinds of products and services. We want to be effective. Effective simply means I'm able to meet my business objectives. I have the capability to do what I should be doing. I get the right results. Efficiency categories are around doing things more cheaply, more reliably, more consistently. And quality as well. Quality is more about consistency and reliability as opposed to cost. Efficiency is more about cost considerations, and quality is more about consistency and fewer defects and less waste. Risk is about doing things with more certainty, more confidence, and understanding to become proactive to when things are emerging as risk areas, to be proactive and mitigate them before they become really bad consequences. Agility is the ability to respond quicker to changing market conditions, changing disruptive forces in the marketplace. So think of these as areas to say, this is what I want to achieve, and you would drill into each of these to say more specific, what are your goals in these areas? But think of these as categories of things I want to have impact areas, and they drive the reason why I want to become data-driven. These become the success criteria. If you can become more innovative, or more efficient, or more agile in your business response, then that by definition is becoming successful. So what is it going to take to get there? Well, you have to build up these 4 layers so that will happen. So right off the bat here, we see we've already had a business capability because we've been in business for so long. But think about the things businesses do. These are the processes. These are the things we do. Maybe there's things we're not doing today we should be doing. But it's really the broad categories of activities. We plan things. We organize our companies. We control processes. We produce stuff. We deliver stuff to customers. We operate machines and equipment. We build things. We create things. We serve customers. And we administer and provide a sort of an administrative layer to things. These are the basic building blocks of most companies. Most things you do fall into one of these categories. This isn't a complete list, but this is just a representative list of things that you need to improve on, because it's through these actions that'll drive the impact you're looking for. So these become areas of improvement that you think you want to enable. Now the question is, how are you going to improve them? Because I'm saying if I can build an analytics capability, I can deliver you something you didn't have before, which is net new information or new insights. You didn't have those before. So it's kind of like, instead of having an old car that wasn't well instrumented, to having a brand new car, and now you got sensors all over the place and it's telling you stuff. How to get to your destination, your fuel consumption, the life cycle of your oil, all these things are happening. But if the driver of the car doesn't listen to the signals, there's no point having them. So these are the kinds of areas we could build to inform the business. We can inform you, which is basic information. We can measure stuff. We can describe things statistically. We can predict the future with certain likelihoods. We can detect problems, diagnose root causes, prescribe recommendations, and discover new patterns and relationships. So most types of words we talk about in the world today of analytics, whether it's big data analytics or other predictive analytics, they probably fall into one of these categories. And these are the things to say, if I had this, I can look into the future, I can understand the past, I can recommend a solution, I can get out of a problem, I can detect things before they become too difficult to deal with. So these are categories of insights that I might want to generate. And recognize that each capability we identify is made up of those 4 building blocks of skills, of processes, of technology, and of policies or of standards. And so we really want to discover those kinds of things we want to build, because it's going to be through models and integrated information we can deliver on these capabilities. But to enable those guys, we have to have data capabilities, which is really to provision data in a form that supports the analytics capability. So there's a bunch of verbs here. We have to discover and find new data. We have to evaluate its suitability. We have to be able to format it, acquire it, integrate it, catalog it, provision it, cleanse it, deliver it. These are all verbs that we have to be good at if the analytics capability can consume the data we're providing. And so these are things that we have to develop. And again, if we don't have the skills or the policies to do this, then sometimes that holds us back. So that's the data capabilities. Now, all of this is enabled by the foundation, which I call organization capabilities. This, you could argue, is leadership and standards. It has other words for it. It might be around how we govern things, how we collaborate. And by say govern things, we have to govern data, and we have to govern the analytical models that are produced. Governance is a really key part here. Governance sets policies, and it has to enforce that the policies are enacted, so we don't lose track of our data, we don't get confused by it, we understand it. Models that are deployed are being calibrated and maintained and retired appropriately. So governance means that the data and the models become true assets through a life cycle. But there's other things that organizations have to create to have people listen to the signals that analytics is being created. We have to be able to collaborate. We have to organize effectively. How do we deploy people into groups that share ideas and are doing something differently? How do we coordinate activities across departments and silos? How do we build accountabilities for making things happen? How do we create the data literacies in companies so that people can understand what the signals are that are being consumed so that the frontline workers can change their behavior when signals are produced to them? How do we build competencies in general so that the people can do the work and go to a new level of performance? How do we create teams that maybe didn't exist before that are spanning, maybe they're virtual teams that span departmental silos? How do we motivate and incent people? There's a tremendous pushback in companies to marginalize predictive analytics because it makes them look vulnerable to decisions they're already making. So there's things we have to put in terms of policies that the human driver of the system is able to effectively use the new signals being presented to them. So it's very analogous to saying you're driving your car, the check engine light comes on, and you ignore it and don't take it to the mechanic, then what's the point of the check engine light coming on? I have to be motivated and incentive to do that, otherwise what's the point of that signal? And without this in place, most of the things we do at the middle two layers aren't effective because people don't listen to the results. So this to me becomes very foundational to put things in place so we actually can transform the organization. So this becomes critical. Now, what I've listed here is these layers of capabilities. And I've kind of said that there's capabilities, these 4 layers, but I've also made the fact that there's inputs and outputs between these capability layers. So we have to understand how do they actually impact each other? Because if we don't understand it, we're probably not going to be able to implement things appropriately. These question marks here about how does the organizational capability impact my data capability? Well, one thing is obvious, that organizational capability should deal with things like security, like metadata, like data quality, like the policies of what data can be used where. That should very much drive the capabilities for your data that you're building. It should also drive, the data capability should say that I have the right data to drive the analytics processes. But the real question at the top here, how does that analytics capability change the business capability? How does it change behavior? How does it change that people start becoming proactive decision makers and not waiting to look in the rearview mirror all the time so they can take action before something becomes really, really out of control? How does that new enhanced business capability actually lead to the impact you want? Because maybe you're investing in the wrong areas. Maybe your capabilities are changing, but they're not producing the right outcomes. So these are all things we have to really, as we plan, we have to sit back and say, how do these things connect and how do they drive each other? So we need to understand what outputs are delivered by each layer and how do they enable the layer above them. Because without that understanding, we're building little islands that will not lead to that overall success. They won't add up to the impact I'm looking for. So that takes collaboration across your teams. It's a leadership issue, and it takes people to work in a collaborative environment to understand what are these question marks, and how do they really, really work, and what are they doing for us? So to kind of get into just with another kind of perspective is thinking about inputs and outputs, that each capability produces something and most of them depend on something. So we could think of the organizational capability as providing a change to my culture or to my literacy or to my incentives or my policies. It's providing something different to the organization that is based on these kind of 4 ideas. And that will have a ripple effect up through the chain. If we talk about the data capability, what does it produce? Well, it really produces useful and relevant data in the right level of quality, security, and integration. It provides useful stuff to the layer above it. So it has to know what's needed above it and how does it provision that to the upper level. So that becomes a major output. What does the analytics produce? Well, I've already said earlier, it produces information and insights. But information can be defined as the answer to a person's question. But if people don't have the right certain kinds of questions, then information becomes noise, it becomes spam. So we have to understand what are the information insights that are useful to the capabilities in the business I'm trying to create so that I actually produce the impact I want. Because when all is said and done, if we're not changing our behavior in terms of how our processes are run or how our customers are served or how our products are built, if we aren't changing our behavior because of becoming data-driven, then we've wasted a lot of money to get there. We haven't invested our money wisely, because that becomes the real proof of success, is that there's a change at the top because those 3 layers at the bottom have caused that change to happen in the right sequence. So now we're better, faster, smarter, and we're making money or saving money, however you want to talk about that, or we have different kinds of risks being mitigated. So this becomes a way to frame the problem working backwards. So what are you trying to achieve? What business capabilities do you want to build? Analytics, data, and organizational capabilities, recognizing that we need a roadmap to understand what are these puzzle piece building blocks I'm creating as I'm moving through this mapping process. So when you think about planning, the question is, this little fuzzy cloud at the top is saying, what's the point of these light blue boxes and how's it going to change the dark blue box? Because that is what's so important. And understand, again, are there political issues, data literacy issues, compensation issues, whatever issues are that are going to be barriers to using analytics in an effective way. So the kinds of questions we need to ask ourselves as planners of programs or investors in projects or activities here is, how can the existing business capabilities you have, because they're already there, how can they be improved by new data-driven capabilities? Can I run a process faster? Can I do things with less waste? Can I do things with more innovation? So that becomes the existing things to be improved on. But there's also another perspective. That's the top-down view, because it says how can the things I'm already doing be done better? But there's a whole new world out there too, which is bottom-up. It says, oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought of it. What could I do that I'm not even doing now because there are new existing data-driven capabilities available to me? There's data I never even thought was available. There's analytics techniques that I was never even considering before. Can I start to make new revenue streams in areas I hadn't thought of before because I can provide new services to my customers? That's a bottom-up approach, which is to say, because the light blue boxes add something new, how can the dark blue box be radically different in some areas, as opposed to simply improving what it's already doing? And so these are 2 questions you need to ask to say, how do they contribute to the impact I'm actually trying to make? So I'm at the point now where I'm going to summarize what we've talked about, and I'm going to turn it in a second or two. I'm going to turn it over to back to Kevin, and if there's questions you have or you've submitted, and we have time for questions, then we'll try to answer those. So what I've tried to do in this last 35 minutes or so was to give you a different way of thinking about what it means to become data-driven. And based on the idea of there's so much noise out there, the becoming data-driven through this framework is a lens to focus on what's important, what impacts you're trying to build, what capabilities will lead there, and what pieces of the puzzle are needed to build those capabilities. So now you can be confident in what you select from the technology landscape, the data landscape, the vendor landscape, to assemble the right pieces that should add up to the impact you're trying to make. It helps you shape the view of analytics is taking on a strategic view in your company. It should help change its behavior. It's not simply providing a new report to somebody. It's changing the dynamics of the organization in terms of how it serves its constituents. It should help you focus on creating a vision, i.e. thinking from top down and bottom up. What could I be doing better I'm already doing today? Or what could I be doing differently I'm not even doing today to make new revenue streams because the opportunity is there? So it helps create a vision. It helps have a discussion with people with a whole range of backgrounds, because we all understand capabilities once it's explained to us. We don't have to be technical, and we don't have to be financial experts. We can simply be people that understand, how can my business change because these opportunities are presenting it to itself. And we can all understand what data-driven success becomes then, because it's being defined in terms that are based on elevated impact areas that are probably driven by objectives. And if we're achieving those, then the capabilities are doing their job. And the final message I would like to leave with you is that this changes the conversation from thinking of data as a cost center to data being an asset, which is an investment center. And if we can see data as an asset, like other assets in our companies, we will invest in them and we'll maximize their use. If we see data as simply a necessary evil and we reduce cost and minimize how long we keep it, then we're not really trying to share that as an asset. That, to me, is a big shift companies are going through right now, is recognizing that data is no longer this cost center liability that we have to it's a reusable asset to make money with it, but it has to be focused on what we're going to do with it. And until we can make that link to the impact area, it's hard to have the discussion about investment. But if you can have that discussion, you're investing in areas to make the impact you want. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'm going to leave it with you at that. So I'd like to thank you. If you want to send me an email or give me some comments, I'd always appreciate that. I'll turn it back to Kevin now, and he can see if there's any questions come in.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate your time on this. I learned quite a bit, and I found it fascinating. So people that are on the call, if you wish to ask Mark a question, please type it into the questions window on your screen. You can type the questions in there, and we'll have Mark answer them. Okay, so we'll just give a couple minutes for questions to come in. Okay, there's a question from Farhad. How do I start analyzing my capabilities? So I guess this is a question about getting started. Mark, what about first steps?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think an assessment is critical, but you need to assess your capabilities on why do you need them. In other words, you need to catalog the important capabilities you think you need, and then break those down into the 4 categories of technology, skills, process, and policies. And you need to, either subjectively or in some sort of discussion with people, just start to say, where are we strong and where are we weak? And you can build some sort of, even in a spreadsheet format, some sort of a high, medium, and low strength kind of world to say, you know, I'm pretty good at this process, but I'm pretty weak at this area. And breaking it apart into those 4 categories, again, technology, skills, process, and policies across the capabilities you need, is a really good starting point. And you can be very formal and have really regimented assessment workshops and surveys and stuff, but it can also be very subjective. And you can start off by simply talking to people, giving their gut feel. Where's our potholes, or where do we have to be better at? That what do you call it? That tribal knowledge is all over the place. You just have to talk to people and say, if we have to be good at these areas, are we, and where are we weak? And get some sort of consensus across talking to people, but the conversation needs to happen.
Okay, so it sounds like you're going to be looking at the capabilities at an overall level, but this leads into another question from Maria, who asks, this is about total transformation. How do I know what data will yield new efficiencies or capabilities? Is there a way of evaluating or weighting the data?
That's a really good question. Sometimes some companies build what's sort of like that's why a lot of companies are forming like data science teams, where sometimes you don't know the answer to that, but you have to do some research. And you might have like a research track of work, is to say, it goes back to this bottom-up approach I talked about, is given this set of data available and these techniques I hadn't used before, what new business capability could they create? That's going to take some research, maybe some prototyping, some experiments within companies, where you can tolerate failures, because not everything will lead to a success. But that bottom-up approach is like funding a research and development program. You need to control it, how much you spend on it, but it has to have some success areas. But it's a good starting point because people don't know what they haven't seen before. So you have to have a research metaphor as well, as opposed to this top-down, which is more structured and just changing what I'm already doing. But I really encourage that research activity that may or may not lead to a final result as something companies should invest in.
Excellent, good, thorough answers. I guess that's also where you could engage somebody like yourself who's been through this before, who knows where some of the quick wins are, the low-hanging fruit. You can point people in the right direction and help them avoid getting caught in mired in complex areas that may not yield a lot of results.
Yes, and sometimes people start off before they have the right pieces in place. Like, you have to be able to talk to people. Some companies don't even like to encourage collaboration. So if you have certain barriers right off the bat, you need to know what they are before you really get into this in a big way. So there's certain fundamentals you have to have in place that I'm committed to this. I'm willing to let people talk and work across boundaries. And you have to have dialogue. Without good dialogue, a lot of this isn't going to go very far. But absolutely, I mean, experience is so, you know, people like myself and other people that work in the field are obviously available to help give advice. Okay?
Okay, very good. We have, hello?
Yep.
Did we lose you? Can you hear me?
I'm still here.
Okay, so the question is, can you value data as an asset?
Not directly. That's an interesting question as well. It's not the data, it's how it's used. So you can value data in the context of a use case or an impact area, because data by itself really has no value. But data in its usage pattern has tremendous value. So you can evaluate the useful or the value of data in the context of the cost that can help you save or the risk can help you mitigate. There is work being done, I know, in people to look at the economics of data as an asset, and it's not a mature area yet. But by itself, data costs you money. It's in the context of how you use it is where it makes you money. So it's an evolving area, and I'd say stay tuned on that. It's still being developed.
Okay, thank you. One final question I'd like to ask: are there any books or other sources of more information on this topic? Is there something about becoming a data-driven business that's that you'd recommend?
There is. In fact, I can't think of the title offhand. It's actually called Becoming Data-Driven. And if you just go to Amazon and do a search on data-driven organizations, you will see a number of them, but there's one called Becoming Data-Driven, which is it's a really good read. It's not an overly technical book, but another set of authors I'd recommend would be Tom Davenport, who started writing a series of books back in about 10 years ago. On his original book was called Competing on Analytics, and he's written a series of books from 2005 to a couple of years ago that is full of case studies for different industries about the challenges they went through to get to this point. So I would recommend him as a series, and there's a number of books just on Amazon to say Becoming Data-Driven Organizations. They're all good reads.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate your time on this. This has been very educational for myself personally and inspiring. I think I'm going to be doing a few things differently next week. I'm going to be sitting down and trying to figure out capabilities organizationally and business-wise, and looking at where we might be able to use some data to improve efficiencies in the business. So this is all really interesting stuff. Thank you for your time. Everybody, you can claim 3/4 of a PDU, 0.75 of a PDU under the business and contextual categories if you're a project manager for this session. As well, you may be able to claim PDUs in other areas or equivalent continuing education credits in other areas. If you have any questions about that, please contact us at sales sales@procept.com. It's in the lower right corner of your screen, sales@procept.com, and someone there would be glad to help you figure out your PDU or continuing education credit situation.